Nous nous réunissons à Montréal, une ville où l'histoire a été écrite par les communistes depuis plus de 100 ans. C'est dans cette ville que le camarade Norman Bethune a rejoint le Parti communiste en 1935, après avoir visité la Russie révolutionnaire, avec un groupe de médecins canadiens sceptiques qui ne pouvaient pas comprendre l'idée révolutionnaire du médecin socialisé pour la sécurité universelle. Bethune est rentré chez lui et a organisé le groupe de Montréal pour la sécurité de la santé du peuple et a élaboré le plan de couverture médicale universelle au Canada, qui a ensuite été mis en œuvre à la suite d'une lutte de masse menée par le Parti communiste, le CCF, et le mouvement syndical, d'abord au Saskatchewan, puis dans tout le Canada en 1968. Well, Medicare was never a gift from the federal government. Liberals and Tories opposed it for decades, despite calling it a sacred trust, and oppose it today with mass layoffs, deep spending cuts, and widespread privatization. It was a mass struggle by the working class that won Medicare 57 years ago, and it will need a mass struggle by labor and its allies today to keep it and to expand it to cover dental, vision, pharmacare, long-term care, and mental health care. Bethune set up an art school in his living room for Montreal's impoverished working-class kids. And while he went to Spain to fight fascism in 1936 and developed the mobile blood transfusion unit, which saved the lives of countless Canadian and international anti-fascist fighters. He traveled across Canada raising funds and recruiting volunteers for the Mackenzie Papineau Battalion, the International Brigade, until leaving for China in 1938 to assist in the fight against Japanese fascism. He died in China in 1939 from a septic cut. He cut his hand in an operation, and it killed him. He never returned to Montreal, though the city was his adopted home. And he is remembered here and across Canada for his immense contributions to universal public health care and to the anti-fascist struggle in Spain and in China, and to the fight for democracy and socialism right here at home. 1937 was the year that Duplessis introduced the padlock law, as you heard a minute ago from Adrian. Officially known as an act to protect the province against communistic propaganda, which made it illegal to rent a hall to communists, to hold a public meeting, or to publish communist literature, including the party's newspaper, Clarté, which was banned, the first victim of Duplessis' padlock law. Clearly, Duplessis was afraid of the Communist Party, as he should have been, and the influence that it had amongst Quebec workers, and he wasn't wrong. The party organized scores of meetings in the streets, in homes, and in workplaces with the goal of organizing a union, a strike, and a party club. It was Communist Party organizers Léa Roback and Madeleine Perron who organized needle trades workers in Valleyfield, Quebec, and led the strike that finally secured their first contract. This was supposed to be a union-free zone in Quebec. Becky Buhay was also involved in organizing women in the needle trades, while Jean Corbin and Annie Buller organized miners in Northern Ontario and Quebec. These struggles took place in the mid-Great Depression, in conditions of mass unemployment and impoverishment, the rise of reaction and fascism, and the drive to militarism and war, conditions that the current Prime Minister, Carney, supported by Parliament, is creating and accelerating with his November budget of massive cuts to jobs, social programs, and public services, and massive increases to military spending and to war. Well, Montreal is also the city where, in 1943, the Communist Party and the working class in Parti riding elected Fred Rose to Parliament, where he fought like a tiger for working people and against fascism in Europe and reaction at home. His growing political and electoral base worried the moneyed interests, and the RCMP moved in and framed him in the infamous Cold War spy trials. He served 6 years in jail, which was exactly 1 day longer than required to remove him from his seat in the House of Commons. What a coincidence. In 1965, the Parti communiste du Québec was formed despite all efforts to prevent it by the government, the RCMP, and the ruling class. 10 days ago, on November 26th, the PCQ celebrated its 60th anniversary and multiple attempts to undermine and dissolve it. And here we are. Well, but Montreal is a city where the working class always fights back. In 2012, post-secondary students organized an 8-month strike against a 75% increase in tuition fees introduced by the provincial Liberals, and succeeded in defeating both the fee increase and the provincial government. Pretty good. Communists were involved in that struggle, including the LGCQ, and just 2 years ago on Monday, 420,000 public sector workers and their unions united in the Front Commun, the Quebec Common Front, launched the biggest strike in Canadian history, and were soon joined by 150,000 others, including 80,000 public sector nurses, to become one of the largest strikes in North American history. Over 12% of Quebec workers were on strike through December, with some strike pay and some without strike pay. When they finally settled, the agreements were supported by slim majorities, sending a strong message of resistance to Premier Legault's right-wing CAQ government. If an election had been held then, the CAQ would have faced massive defeat. And I understand that that's a situation that's repeated today. Working people backed the strike, the demand for better wages and public services, and social programs that went with it. These were economic and political demands that echoed with working people, that generated mass public support, and that cooked the government and corporate demands for cuts and privatization. Once again, the bourgeois press and media attempted to black out news of this magnificent struggle by the working class and working people of Quebec. The banks, corporations, and governments were afraid that the mass militant and united struggle in Quebec would catch fire in English-speaking Canada and spread across the country. Further, the role of the CLC, the Canadian Labour Congress leadership, and the leadership of the international unions in particular, was to downplay the strikes as a provincial matter and not a struggle requiring mobilizations of labor support across Canada. The silence resonated in Quebec and fed the separatist view that there is no basis for working class unity and a common struggle across Canada. But we know, to the contrary, that what has happened here in Quebec with the strikes led by the Common Front in 2023-24 and the 8-month student strike in 2012 is exactly what needs to be replicated across Canada today. As the old union adage goes, united we stand, and divided we fall. Strikes across Canada have shown that workers in English-speaking Canada are willing and able to fight in both the public and private sectors. In the public sector, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers is on the front line of the fight against privatization of public services and mass layoffs. CUPW has worked hard to link their struggle for jobs and wages to the services that they provide to the public, including door-to-door delivery and new services, including postal banking. Public support is vital, and which is why the corporation has launched its campaign of financial ruin, though this is a manufactured fact. Canada Post has declared a settlement is in hand. Well, we will wait to see what the workers have to say when they vote to accept or reject the offer. That's what counts. Nurses, teachers, and education workers in schools, colleges, and universities have also led strikes and walkouts across the country and linked their struggles to defense of health care and public education. According to Statistics Canada, work stoppages have jumped in the last 2 years as workers fought to recover wages and purchasing power lost to inflation, high interest rates, high prices on food, fuel, and housing, job losses anticipated and delivered from corporate profits, Trump tariffs, and federal government cuts. Wow. Workers are angry, but also energized by the growing strike movement and the willingness of workers to challenge government interference, such as the back-to-work powers included in Section 107 of the Federal Labor Code, and the even more repressive powers in Quebec's Bill 89, which limits unions to collective bargaining and forbids any political action. In response, 100,000 Quebec workers took to the streets last week in opposition to Bill 89, the right-wing CAQ government, and their anti-worker, anti-people policies. Defiant Air Canada workers also won wide public support for their refusal to return to work, their rejection of the shitty contract offered by Air Canada, and their success in securing a better deal. These acts of defiance have invigorated workers across Canada who are also demanding better contracts, stronger unions, and a more militant fight against the employers. Well, this year, workers in the private sector are facing massive job losses as a result of US tariffs. In the auto sector, which is in the eye of the storm, Unifor has announced it will occupy automobile plants scheduled for closure. This is how the CAW responded to mass layoffs in the past. But the saw-off can't be better severance packages for unemployed workers. It has to be preservation of the jobs, which can be guaranteed in a publicly owned and controlled automobile and transportation industry. And that's what we fight for. Well, that's how to build up Canada's manufacturing and secondary industry. It's how to create good value-added jobs for workers today and tomorrow. And it has nothing to do with military spending or production for war. Zero, nada, nothing. It's for these reasons that delegates to the Ontario Federation of Labour Convention in November voted to support nationalization of the steel and auto industries. Good job, well done. And our comrades were there to move all that forward. The December 2nd announcement by Algoma Steel that 1,000 more steel workers will be laid off in Sault Ste. Marie comes just 2 weeks after the company completed the paperwork to receive $500 million in federal financial support and from the Ontario government. That's 1/3 of the workforce who got the pink slip just 3 weeks before Christmas. Happy holidays. The Steelworkers Union now has every reason and all the evidence it needs to demand public ownership of Algoma Steel and permanent jobs for steelworkers in the Soo and a steady supply of Canadian steel for building homes, schools, hospitals, trains, planes, ships, and public transit across the country, and to oppose the war production that the local mayor in Sault Ste. Marie is proposing. Well, Mark Carney's elbows up stance against Trump and the far-right MAGA movement he leads has evaporated, along with his spine when it comes to Trump's attacks on Canadian sovereignty and independence, and to Trump's job-destroying tariffs on auto, steel, aluminum, softwood lumber, and more. Likewise, Carney's elbows have sunk below the waterline when it comes to Trump's demand that U.S. auto companies and others in value-added manufacturing and secondary industries must close their Canadian operations and move them to the U.S. or face the consequences. Hundreds of thousands of jobs are on the line, and whole communities are under threat. Carney's response is to ignore the layoffs, instead of offering large amounts of cash from the public purse to the corporations involved. Shame. Shame. Carney has moved in quick time to tear down interprovincial trade regulations, which they called barriers, they're regulations, and is under pressure to eliminate supply management, which guarantees farmers an annual income in exchange for production of specified amounts of eggs, milk, poultry, and pork annually. This will be a key point in the 2026 negotiations over CUSMA, the free trade agreement with the US and Mexico, which Carney is desperate to maintain, despite its negative impact on Canadian sovereignty and independence, on foreign and domestic policy, on employment and living standards, and on the environment. Trump wants more access to Canadian markets and resources and aims to get it, or without renewal of the current free trade agreement, with or without. Pulling out of CUSMA, the free trade deal, and hemispheric free trade with the US is vital for recovery of Canada's sovereignty and independence and for securing a multilateral and mutually beneficial trade policy with the world. Carney's move to accept Trump and NATO's demand to divert 5% of GDP annually to military spending is a massive tell about this government's foreign policy, which is all about imperialism's drive to war on China, on Cuba, on Eastern Europe, on Venezuela, Colombia, and South and Central America, on Palestine and the Middle East, on Sudan, which has some of the richest resources in Africa. Carney's job promises are all about jobs in the military, in military production, or in military deployment in US-led wars around the world, or in cities across Canada, at protests and demonstrations, in uniform or undercover, as is already happening in the US. The drive to militarism and war is what is at the heart of the November federal budget. The commitment to divert $150 billion a year to military spending will result in 40,000 public sector jobs being lost. Those workers lose their jobs in the months ahead. And this is just the start of the layoffs. Further, the budget will cut federal social spending by 24% this year, leading to even fewer and weaker public services and social programs, and opening the door even wider to privatization of healthcare and education, and to the elimination of programs and services like the newborn $10 a day national child care program, which is already sputtering from lack of funding and federal support. Other programs are also on the line. While access to public pensions may become harder if the government raises the pension age to 68 or 70, as is happening in Europe now. The Carney budget will make deep cuts to spending, while lowering corporate taxes and eliminating luxury taxes on the rich. You know, they need a break. Right? It will increase the deficit, while cutting essential programs and services, including funding for cities, for education and Medicare, while an economic downturn is just ahead, according to economists. Massive layoffs resulting from Trump tariffs and government job cuts will stress surviving government programs such as employment insurance even more, leading to increased poverty and homelessness across the country. As we saw on Budget Day, at the end of the day, the vast majority of MPs and most parties supported the main thrust of the Liberal budget, the cuts to public sector workers, and universal social programs and public services that will finance the drive to militarism and war ordered by NATO against China, Eastern Europe, Cuba, and wherever working people challenge imperialist policies and domination and fight for their sovereignty and for socialism. The Conservatives, while they voted against the budget in the hopes of forcing a federal election call, recognized their policies in the budget, including NATO funding, public sector layoffs and cuts, social program cuts, tax cuts for the rich, unemployment for the working class, among other policies that are really Tory policies. While denouncing the Liberals for failing to address workers' concerns about high food prices, high rents, and interest rates, the Tories were supporting use of the Constitution's notwithstanding clause to order workers back to work. They also support legislation banning dissent. The Bloc Québécois lined up with the Conservatives in an effort to force an election and to bolster their support in Quebec, where they compete with the Liberals for votes and seats. Green Party leader Elizabeth May supported the budget in exchange for minor changes on the Liberals' environment policy, in the process exposing the Green Party's high level of comfort with bourgeois policies and corporate policies and bourgeois politics. May's vote cost the Greens public support, leading to her subsequent announcement that she'd made a mistake supporting the budget. Well, that's for goddamn sure. The leaderless NDP's weak policies and big election debts left them divided and scrambling to avoid another election. That was their priority. In the process, exposing the failures and opportunism of right-wing social democracy at a critical moment for working people. Who was there to fight for working people on that bloody budget? You didn't hear anybody. We heard from the Communist Party, though. This is capitalism in the 21st century. More vicious, more violent, more dangerous than ever at home and abroad. None of the parties voted with the interests and needs of the working class top of mind. Women and youth, Indigenous, racialized peoples, family farmers and fishers, immigrants, refugees, the 2S LGBTIQ community, and the growing army of unemployed and underemployed workers were unrepresented in that budget debate and votes, and continue to be unrepresented today. 10 days ago, the Prime Minister signed a pipeline deal with the Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Oh, go ahead and boo. All right. And this will create the conditions to move bitumen from the tar sands in Alberta through unceded Indigenous territory in British Columbia to tidewater on the BC coast. The Memorandum of Understanding was signed over the objections of the BC provincial government, environmentalists, and despite massive opposition from Indigenous nations and their rights as set out in UNDRIP, that is the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This deal flies in the face of Indigenous national rights and urgent environmental issues, and is tied to the preparations for war, building a war economy, and stamping out opposition to these plans. The Communist Party stands with Indigenous peoples and all those opposed to this proposed pipeline. Mass organized pressure on this minority parliament by the labor and people's movements can be built to block this Memorandum of Understanding and the powerful energy companies that are behind it. We call for public ownership of natural resources, a rapid shift to renewable energy, and recognition of the national rights of Indigenous peoples, and implementation of the calls to action by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. Our parties call for the formation of an anti-monopoly, anti-imperialist democratic alliance comprised of the labor and democratic movements, family farmers and fishers, Indigenous peoples, the Communist Party, and all those opposed to this corporate agenda of war and limitless corporate power and profits is more urgent today than ever. The re-election of Trump and the far-right political movement he fronts for, and the multinational corporate interests he represents and who fund him, are moving rapidly to war against China, against Cuba, against Venezuela and Colombia, and are backing the continuing Israeli genocide and occupation of Palestine, the ongoing slaughter in Sudan by rival military forces, which includes Sudan's military government. The situation we face today, comrades, is urgent, and it's complicated. Stopping the drive to war by mobilizing the people's movements to fight for peace and disarmament is vital. Nuclear war will be the end of the world, which makes the fight for disarmament and peace primary and essential today. Mobilizing the trade union movement and the working class to engage in this struggle for peace and disarmament is essential. It's the sleeping giant when it comes to peace and disarmament. Work and labor for peace shows that this can be done when the links are made and the urgency is apparent. The federal budget does that with the mass layoffs and cuts to social spending that are the way the government intends to raise $150 billion annually to fund the military. This is how youth and students, women, the 2S LGBTIQ community, seniors, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, and immigrant and refugee communities, where war is a lived experience for too many, can also be mobilized into action. Peace is now a bread and butter issue for affecting everybody. Mobilizing and organizing the left forces in the trade union movement is another key task for communists in the trade unions now. Mobilizing the left forces to win the center for left-wing policies and independent labor political action will isolate the right wing and win important gains and advances for workers. This is also how we grow, by recruiting the best fighters, the most politically advanced, most militant, and most dependable individuals, who are also the most likely to be strong members of the party and strong trade unionists too in the struggles ahead. They're looking for us, we're looking for them. Let's make that connection. Building the Communist Party and the laborers and people's movements and in current and future struggles is the best way to build our party and the forces for socialism that are decisive in the struggles ahead. We need to grow. We need to grow in well-organized and planned campaigns that will attract the best fighters for socialism and for working class advances today. All of these things, the fight to build the party, the YCL, our press, and the fight to win people for socialism, for independent labor political action, and for mass action by the labor and democratic forces, and much more, are just some of what we need to discuss at this convention. We need to hear about the struggles underway across Canada, about who is involved, who's missing, about building unity and action around key demands and objectives. We need to share our experiences in these struggles, successes and failures, problems and solutions, and how this was achieved and what was learned, important for identifying strengths and correcting mistakes. We look forward to hearing about work across the country this weekend, our experiences and challenges in the big struggles unfolding everywhere. The time for this is in the first hour of discussion under each of the 4 sections in the political resolution. This is where we get the big picture about politics and about resistance and about how we can best intervene to advance the fight for peace and disarmament, for labor and democratic rights, for sovereignty and independence, and for unity of all the progressive forces in a common struggle for social progress and for some, for socialism. This discussion is an important part of this convention. And regrettably, the time we have is getting smaller when what's needed is more time and more discussions on the big issues and politics that are unfolding in Canada and internationally, not less. Things are happening so fast. As you are aware, there have been a lot of written contributions in the 4 convention bulletins that have been published and circulated to members across the country in English and French, and that is very positive. It will deepen our discussions this weekend, and the party will be stronger for it as a result. If you haven't received bulletin number 4, which is just out, or you haven't had time to read through all the articles in the earlier bulletins, you can catch up on your reading before you go to bed tonight. They're all in your convention kits, and there's no section tonight. These struggles are where our party will grow as workers come to recognize that the Communist Party is the party that fights for workers. It's the real workers' party for youth and for socialism, where the working class is in the driver's seat. With this in mind, I'm happy to tell you that we have the makings of a new club in Nova Scotia. And this will be, setting it up, will be the new Central Executive Committee's first item of business after the convention. Let's hope it's the first of many new clubs to be formed over the next 3 years. Let 2026 be a new year where more new clubs are organized and where the party can become visible and active in more regions and in more of the struggles underway across the country. This is a good way to start the new term of office for the new Central Committee and the new party leader who will be elected on Sunday. Well, comrades, when I formed the Central Committee in September, that after 50 years of working for the party, it was time I took a rest and made room for someone younger who had lots of years ahead to give to the party. I'm not dying, by the way. And lots of experience behind to be well prepared to take on this job. This will be an important discussion involving the whole convention, so don't be late on Sunday morning. And if you are a candidate for the Central Committee or the Audit or Appeals Committee, please fill out the nomination paper and the credentials table with your leadership qualifications and experience. This will be forwarded to the nominations committee, who will make sure the information is conveyed to delegates, who can then cast an informed vote. Because it's a big country. Commerce, we don't all see each other every day, every month, even every year. And this will give you some basis for deciding who you want to vote for when you're aware of what areas Commerce are working in and so forth. It will be, well, we'll be casting an informed vote. Always a good idea. Au nom de notre parti, je tiens à remercier tous ces camarades pour le travail qu'ils ont accompli pour le parti pendant de nombreuses années et à travers de nombreuses luttes. Nous nous appuyons sur vos épaules. La lutte continue. Le 21e siècle est une période de transition du capitalisme et au socialisme au Canada et dans le monde entier. Nous avons beaucoup à discuter. Commençons son travail. Merci.